Commissioner Fuller, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew.
Victoria's got 300 to 400 cases a day, everyone knows that. New South Wales about 20. We've had protests like has occurred in Melbourne, and hotel quarantining's been occurring in Sydney and Melbourne. What's happened there that hasn't happened here, or vice versa?
Yeah, I think New South Wales has taken a unique approach to the emergency, and the Premier in late March made a decision to put New South Wales Police in charge of the emergency as the combat agency, Andrew, and I'm sure there was a few people looking at that with interest, and we're the only state or territory to have police in charge. And the reason was it really turned into more of a security operation than it has a health operation. And the importance of police coming into the combat agency means that we can secure the hotels and we can secure the borders, and we're not taking doctors and nurses and support staff away from the important job of keeping people healthy. And secondly, the contact tracing work that they're doing in New South Wales has been crucial to us not going down the path of Victoria.
So in other states, health officials are largely in charge of some of these operations, and it's police here. Is that the circumstance?
Yeah, absolutely it is. Which means that when it comes to securing the hotels, we have police and defence on the front line, making sure that no one escapes and no one gets lost. But at the same time, health is there supporting individuals for their health and their mental health.
All right, so what's the setup in the quarantining as far as the New South Wales Police are concerned? How many police do you have there as opposed to, say, security guards? What's the mix?
Yeah, look, it really depends on the load. We were up to nearly 10,000 people in hotel accommodation at any given time, certainly at its peak. And we've had 37,000 people, believe it or not, come back into Sydney hotels only in really the recent few months. So for us, it's been an enormous operation. But we have police at reception, at the airport, at customs, to ensure that no one gets lost, no one escapes. They go onto buses, they're securely transported back to individual hotels. Each hotel at the beginning particularly had a superintendent, inspector, a sergeant and other troops to make sure that not just the security part of the operation was flawless, but the logistics. You know, people need to get fed and they need their bags and they need a whole range of other things. Being mindful that these are Australians coming back to their country and they haven't done anything wrong. So you're trying to treat people with dignity at the same time and make sure that those 14 days are not too difficult, particularly for those coming back with family members. But, and there's a big but, is that we know from the transmission rates, we know that the virus is in a reasonable percentage of people coming back in from overseas. That was really crucial in our state, making sure the virus didn't spread from the hotels into the general public.
Well, you must look at Victoria and say, how the heck did that happen, do you?
Look, we do in a sense that we don't want New South Wales. You don't want to see Sydney Metro locked down. I mean, Victoria at the moment, there's 5 million people in lockdown and no one gets any joy from that. And that's obviously caused the Premier in New South Wales to lock down the borders, and that lockdown will increase on Tuesday. So we get no joy, but at the same time, you're always looking for lessons learnt in policing terms to make sure that if we don't make the same mistakes, it's a much better outcome for the people in New South Wales.
So tell me about Gladys Berejiklian deciding to effectively put you, not just police, you, in charge of the coronavirus crisis. How did that sort of come about? Did she call you out of the blue? Were there discussions over a period of time between you and her about it?
I was attending the crisis cabinet meetings in the morning, and I think the Premier was reading the play extremely well in terms of the complexities of this. You had the Ruby Princess, you had 14 other cruise ships at its peak sitting off the coast, and then you overlay that with the hotel operation coming, the health orders that were being enacted on a daily basis that really needed police to enforce them. You could see that the complexity of the operation was just growing exponentially on a daily basis. And the government itself and the Premier really came out of one of the worst bushfire seasons in my time. And then we ran into a couple of weeks of storms and some minor flooding. And there was a lot of fatigue out there as well in the emergency management world. So I think from her perspective, I was fresh. My background in emergency management is strong. she asked if I could take on the Leocon position, which is the most senior, the Seacon position, which is the most senior emergency management person in the state. Governor endorsed that, Andrew, and then really the 17,000 police rallied behind the people of New South Wales to try and make the state as safe as possible from a health perspective.
Well, let me ask you about the Ruby Princess and the other cruise ships. I mean, you've done a bit of a John Howard there, haven't you? You basically said you are not coming here to the crew unless you're an Australian resident, and you were quite determined. You really turned them away. You were tough, I guess. What was the determination or the thinking for you behind your approach on that, and how did it play out?
What was key was protecting the health system, and everything that police have done in the combat agencies protecting the health system. And why? Is because if you get the virus and you're ill, you need an ICU bed with a ventilator. And when we started this emergency, we had around 750 beds, which is that has nearly trebled now through sound procurement. But the reality is, if we had taken those 9,000 crew members off, we could have decimated our health system, which meant really then the people of New South Wales who had made lots and lots of sacrifices, their lives were going to be put at risk. And you know, that's not being an alarmist, that's just a fact. It is that we know that those ships had high levels of transmission. We know the crew members on board had it. But at the same time, I had to balance, obviously, if, we had people on the ships that were sick, then we took them off individually and we made sure that they were quarantined in quarantine health hotels and that they couldn't put the New South Wales public at risk. But really, pushing those ships away from mine was the only way to ensure the people of New South Wales were protected.
Sure. And now the borders, the shutdown with Victoria. How much notice did you get of that, and how difficult has that been? And what does that mean for police resources generally?
So from a pre-planning perspective, New South Wales has the most complex borders in Australia. So it's something from a police perspective we had been looking at, because it could have been the Australian Capital Territory, or it could have been Queensland in reverse, or South Australia in reverse. So it's something that we had looked at. So we had been talking to the Premier about it, but the reality is that you don't know what the virus is going to do. We were tracking Victoria closely, but once they started to move into the hundreds, and then that was getting up to the 200, I felt that we weren't far off enacting the border closures. And I got the formal call on it on the Sunday, and really by the Monday morning we were in the process of moving 650 police down to the border, which is an enormous operation. So at its peak in the hotels, we had around 650 police, and at the peak at the border, we had 650 police. So are we stretched, Andrew? No, we're not stretched, but the reality is that we can't continue to pull 650 police out and put them into COVID-type operations, and that's why we're working closely with government, trying to find other ways we can deploy police and emergency services to assist in the operation, particularly if the border lockdown goes long term.
Do you mean more ADF help, or what do you mean?
In terms of the border controls, we can use other emergency services under New South Wales Police, so that's something we're looking at the moment. ADF have been such an important partner for New South Wales right through the bushfires into Corona, and they're around 350 now on the border, which has been support that I've received gratefully, because it's 350 less police we've got to take out of local area commands and districts across New South Wales. So they're an extremely important part of this.
What are the chances of another shutdown in New South Wales? What sort of reassurance can you give citizens in terms of what we're about to face the rest of this year in New South Wales?
If we don't get compliance with the health orders, with the Premier's warnings around social distancing, around big crowds, around the pubs, clubs, the restaurants, the cafes where people mingle, then we're a chance. We're a chance of sliding down that same slippery path as Victoria's gone. So, what's my promise to the people of New South Wales is that we will manage the borders appropriately. We will manage those returning Australians from overseas appropriately. But at the same time, Andrew, we're going to ramp up enforcement of the health orders, particularly those who are flouting those laws across New South Wales. And you see with those clusters, you just need one restaurant, one pub or club to drop the ball, and you see tens and tens and tens of people who contact the virus. Now, each one of those could have contact with 10, 20, 30 people, which means the contact tracing could take days or weeks. And whilst that's happening, of course, more and more people are getting the virus. So, you know, in terms of the importance that police role will play in this for the rest of the year and perhaps into next year is not lost on me. We've really tried to work with the community. And I think many, many people are taking this seriously. It only takes one person not to. So the message to the community, the message to my police out there is that we've given plenty of warnings. People fully understand the risks out there. The warnings are over.
And then you've got this spectre of another protest, a Black Lives Matter protest. That just seems crazy, doesn't it?
Look, it certainly does, you know, off the back of what happened in Victoria, and there's certainly some intelligence that people who attended the protest came from the vertical towers, and I don't want to see that happen in Sydney or in New South Wales, and we will take that matter to the Supreme Court. Now, win, lose or draw, Andrew, we can still take action against people for breaching health orders, and if 1,000 people turn up, you know, maybe I can only write tickets to 500. But do you want to be the first person to get the $1,000 ticket? That's the question.
So you're in for potentially a tough day there, because even if you win the courts, people tend to turn up, don't they?
That's right. But we will then use the health orders to fine people for breaching the laws that have been put in place to protect all the people of New South Wales. And I think just not a time to be selfish. There are many ways that you can protest. There are many ways you can go online and forums, and even through the media you can get your voice. But you know, I think it would be devastating to anyone's cause to cause the next cluster breakout in New South Wales. Because I'll tell you now, Andrew, is a lot of protests happen in the city every year. We have up to 1,000 protests, so it's not unusual to have a protest. But the question is, do you want your protest to be the one that puts New South Wales back 5 or 10 years economically? Because that's exactly what could happen. It's exactly what we saw in Victoria.
How do you think Scott Morrison and Gladys Berejiklian have handled the crisis?
Well, I think through bushfires into COVID-19, you'd have to go back a long, long time to see a Premier and a Prime Minister deal with two such significant emergencies. And I think probably in any other time, I think they would be remembered as great leaders. I think it's very challenging to be a leader this day, because it's really in 12-hour blocks. Your performance is measured in 12-hour blocks. I think it's difficult, but I think in terms of a leadership perspective and a decision-making perspective, you look where New South Wales is, I think they've done an outstanding job. But unfortunately, we would say they've got a long way to go as well.
The challenge isn't over. Now, you've had in your time in the job the odd reason or request to investigate politicians. First, I'm going to ask you about both these matters. One, Don Harwin and Angus Taylor. I think you know what's coming.
Yeah, of course.
Don Harwin, do you still think you made the right call? And there have been reports, I guess, that he was advised personally, privately by the AG on his appeal and so forth. How do you feel about how that all sort of unwound?
I think the public would support the New South Wales Police Commissioner, a decision that I made in relation to giving the ticket, or certainly allowing the ticket to stand. I think at that time, you know, you had the Deputy Premier and others talking about the dangers of people taking the virus into regional New South Wales who were on the back of bushfires and drought. Now, if that didn't stand up in court, or the DPP made a decision to pull it, I accept and respect their decision. They're a higher prosecuting authority than New South Wales Police is. But as I've said, Andrew, I stand by the decision, and I think the community would be supportive of that.
Now, on Angus Taylor, obviously you referred it to the Federal Police. Was it the belief of your investigators that document was falsified in his office? Was there a belief that it was dodgied up accidentally or deliberately?
The document itself was loaded by City of Sydney Council as a Word document, not a PDF document, which means anyone who went online could have actually doctored it. From our investigation, if that document was doctored, it was done in the ACT. So who did it? You know, we may never know that, but as with our normal protocols, if there's an offence that happens in another jurisdiction, then that gets passed on to that jurisdiction. So we were just following what is normal protocol. So who did it? Did it happen from that office? Did it happen somewhere else, Andrew? I don't know the answer to that, and we may never.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.